This, my friends, borrowing Riv's terminology, is a wide-low crankset. And in my opinion, it is one of the most underrated, underappreciated, but super useful cranksets that you could possibly use. It's called wide-low because it has an extremely wide range, but is also biased towards the lower end. Typical wide-low cranksets are something with a big ring of 40 tooth and a smaller ring of, say, 26, 28. This one in particular is a 40 tooth large ring and a 22 small ring. I actually wouldn't suggest this particular combination after having ridden it. I was curious how well it would work, and it works okay, but I think in the long term, I'm actually going to replace the small inner ring for a 26 to kind of narrow that gap. When you pair a wide-low crankset with a wide-range rear cassette, right now it's an 1142 in the back. This gives like tremendous range. The high gear is 112 gear inches and the low is like 14 gear inches, which is just redonkulous. But probably more importantly, when you are in the lowest gear and in the highest gear, the chain isn't like going sideways. It sounds a lot better, it feels a lot better. I'd assume that it wears down the drivetrain less just because you don't get those extreme angles. If you set this up in a more reasonable configuration, say 40 tooth as a big ring and a 26 as the small ring, that 40-11 combination still gives you 98 gear inches, which I think is reasonably high. As you guys know, Eddie Merckx set his 1 hour record on 97 gear inches. So to my mind, anything beyond that is just aspirational, at least for me. But what you get is some really low gearing. So if you're touring off-road and you're actually carrying stuff with you, you can easily spend more time spinning up that hill or mountain rather than pushing your bike. So I know what you're thinking, if this is so great, why haven't you heard of it? Why isn't it the norm? Well, it's existed before. The wide-low configuration is very similar to what was once the mountain double. Mountain biking, as we know, has gone pretty much more or less one by, and the mountain double has disappeared. I also think it was a disservice to call it the mountain double. They should have called it the adventure crank, because I think that combination is perfect for touring. We actually ran that years ago and absolutely loved it. And when I was looking to spec out my bikes again, I was a little dismayed that you could no longer find a mountain double with a 40 tooth big ring, or at least it's not very readily available. I think by it being pigeonholed for mountain biking, it just got overlooked for other disciplines like gravel, touring, even commuting. Another reason why I don't think it ever really took off in the gravel space, some people equate their chainring size with, well, you know. Slowly, people are getting over that. You know, Shimano finally released a 4630. Lots of 1x drivetrains ship with a 40 or 42 tooth chainring. So it's becoming more common to not have a 50 tooth in the front just for some weird flex. So those two reasons, some weird masculinity issues, and also it being pigeonholed just for mountain biking, I think that's why this never really took off. Some of you are probably wondering, why not just use a triple? I've been riding with the triple recently, and it's reminded me of all the reasons why I just don't like them. I found that with a triple, there's a lot of overlap. So for example, in the big ring, I'm usually on the lower half of the cassette already. To my mind, it makes sense to just cut off the upper end, the excess that I don't really use, and have it so that 95% of the time I'm in this larger ring. And once we hit the bottom of a climb or a mountain, we do live in Montana after all, I can just drop it to that smaller ring. The idea with a wide range is basically you have two very distinct ranges. And if it's set up correctly, you're not actually moving the derailleur back and forth very often. You're pretty much living in that larger ring most of the time. I feel like there is some historical precedent to something like this. If you look at the half step plus granny gearing that used to exist, the idea is that you would fine tune with those two large chain rings and then have a bailout gear. But that was back when cassettes were like 5 or 6 or 7 speed. With a modern cassette, like a 10 or 11 speed cassette, that's essentially your half stepping. You have good enough granularity plus massive range when you need it. So now that I've sold you on the wide low, you're probably thinking, what bougie expensive crank is this? This is a crank by IXF. It's kind of it's an Amazon brand, and the crank arms themselves only cost $45 to $50. It also uses an external bottom bracket, Holotech 2. It's an interesting option if you don't want to use a square taper, which actually I have no problem with. Most people use this crank to set up their bikes 1x, but it actually has two sets of chainring mounting points. One on the outside, which is 104 BCD, and one on the backside, which is 64 BCD. So you can actually use this as a double. That's all the good news. There is some bad news, however, and that is mostly finding chain rings. It's really difficult, if not impossible, to find a 40 tooth 104 BCD that isn't a narrow wide chainring specifically for 1x. Since the proliferation of 1x, shifting chainrings have just kind of disappeared. So it totally sucks. The other downside of this crankset, which isn't terrible for me, is that it does have a mountain bike Q factor. So the Q on this is 170. Some people are super sensitive. I am not, so don't even notice it, but that is something to keep in mind. Another way to make yourself a wide low is to modify a pre-existing triple. This is a Shimano Alivo triple. I actually bought this new online for $84. And this might be a better way to go because you're already starting out with some chain rings. So I took out the middle chain ring and I had to get fancy new 1x bolts. And I moved the outer chain ring to the middle position and then reattach the small inner one. This one has a 40 tooth outer, which is awesome. The inner is 22 and I'm gonna swap that out for a 26 eventually. This is another good way to go if you have an old mountain bike 3x crank, or if you search online for one, just make sure it actually has chainring bolts so you can alter the configuration and they're not pinned to the crankset itself. And like I said, this brand new cost me 85 bucks. I got a chance to take this bike out on our gravel loop in this configuration, and I was actually pleasantly surprised at how well it shifts. It's a pretty easy downshift going from big to small. You do kind of have to slowly baby it up to the bigger ring. It just takes a little bit of finesse. It's not a huge deal. I basically love how I'm not managing the front shifter most of the time until we get to the base of a steep climb. Then I just drop it down into the smaller ring. So to my mind, you get an amazing range similar to a triple, but you get much better chain line as opposed to a wide range 1x. So why am I making this video? Well, I just want to share with you guys different options out there, what I'm leaning towards in terms of my personal choices for a 2x, and also just the far-flung hope that someone in the bike industry will watch this video, see some merit, and start developing chain rings for a 104/64 BCD, or just come out with more wide lows. What do you think of this concept? Leave your thoughts in the comment below. And if you guys appreciate this video, like, I wasn't paid to make this video, I bought all this stuff, then consider supporting the channel by joining us on Patreon or buying a sticker so I can get more things to hack around on the channel. As always, everybody, keep the supple side down.